Um, well, speaking of blasts from the past,
Yes.
so we had another X-Men episode.
Yeah. And
Wow, such enthusiasm in your voice, Daniel.
yeah, so sorry. It was all right. It was fine. It wasn't like last week's episode, but it was.
It was better off than episode 4, though. Man, poor Storm. They just do not seem to think that she can carry her own episode for some reason.
Yeah, yeah. Her story was the B plot in not one but two episodes.
Which, if you add them together, now I've heard people argue that the stuff with Xavier was the B plot, but I just don't see it.
I don't either.
Because it's like, usually what you start with is your A plot if you're cutting back and forth.
Yeah.
And it seems to be driving things much more often. Honestly, the Storm stuff with the Life, Death, and Forge and the Adversary,
Mm.
it really just felt like an afterthought.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it was. I'm trying to think of the right way to describe it. The way I felt about it, it was just kind of. It almost felt like filler. Like they just almost like they had to. Storm lost her powers, and then it's like, okay, well, she needs to quickly get her powers back, or just kind of just give her powers back and just be done with it.
I think the big issue with the whole Storm storyline, and let's see, do we want to throw up a spoiler alert or? Yeah, spoiler alert
Yeah,
because this is hard to talk about without getting into spoilers. I
yeah,
guess from a production standpoint, the animation continues to be mostly good, aside from some scenes where they have dropped frame rates, and you got to see some cool stuff from the Marvel Cosmic Universe, like Shi'ar fighting with Kree, so that was cool.
yeah. And Ronan the Accuser makes an appearance.
Yep.
Uh,
As does Deathbird and the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. So
yeah, yeah.
a thought I didn't really have until I saw Deathbird in this is that is it just because Deathbird kind of Blackfire from Teen Titans with serial numbers uh, ground off.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm 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 not the biggest Teen Titans comics fan, but I've read enough to go, wait a minute, these two ideas are kind of similar. And X-Men and Teen Titans were kind of in competition for a big chunk of the 70s and 80s for that top slot. So it kind of makes sense that they would riff on each other. Uh,
Yeah.
that's where Terra from Teen Titans came from, actually, was them going, well, what if we had a Kitty Pryde character, but she was actually an irredeemable villain? But back to X-Men.
Yeah.
We could talk about the B plot first uh, because that's a continuation from episode four's B plot.
Yeah.
Um, I think the big issue with it, this is kind of, I kind of have always thought of Storm as a character that I appreciate, but I don't really like all that much.
Hmm.
Like I've heard Comics Perch talk on his show about how he thinks that you could make a Storm ongoing comic series work if you gave it the right angle and like if you had her do cool things all the time. And maybe, but I also kind of feel like, and I think this is part of why back in the 80s they had the idea to take her powers away for a while, is that she's a little bit hard to challenge on a power scale. Although it's weird because your powers don't actually make her any more durable, so she's like a glass cannon, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, and so what you end up doing with her is mainly just focusing on her inner struggles. Uh, in particular with this series, and then the first series was her dealing with her claustrophobia.
Right, and that's the other thing, is that, like, while I'm not the biggest Storm fan in the world, she's a very well drawn character in the sense that I'd like a well drawn character. You can put them in any situation and more or less know how they'll respond.
Yeah.
Like Storm has some triggers, like like the big one being her claustrophobia. In this case, and also she's had a very strange life because she was a she her parents died in a plane crash, and then she was trapped in a air pocket, I think, beneath like where the crash had happened, which is where she got her claustrophobia from. And then she was forced to be a thief on the streets in Egypt. And then her mutant powers came in, and she was literally worshipped as a goddess by an African tribe. And then she became a superhero. Like, girl's been all over the place.
Yeah, yeah.
No wonder she doesn't know what her self-esteem is.
Yeah. And didn't she have a relationship with Black Panther at one point?
Yeah, that came later.
Oh, okay.
Although they tried to retcon it that she had always had a relationship with Black Panther. That 2000s Black Panther run was not very good in retrospect,
Mm.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and Ninja says Storm. He always thinks Storm is best when she's with a group. Yeah,
Yeah, I would agree with that. Storm is one of those characters like oh, Colossus. I don't think you could have a ongoing solo Colossus comic book because he's meant to be part of a group.
yeah. And he also says his favorite time with Storm was when she was involved with the New Mutants when they had to rescue Karma from the Shadow King.
I'm not super familiar with that era, unfortunately.
Uh, but but yeah, and of course you had the whole her whole dynamic with Forge, which just seemed really rushed.
Yeah, I mean, in the first episode, they were really together. They were declaring their love for each other. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Uh, and this one, it's like it's treated like they've been friends for a long time. It's like, I know that some things were happening off camera, but you didn't give us a sense of time.
Yeah. And yeah, and they had the adversary, right? That was the name of the bird god demon thing.
Okay, did I miss something? Like, did it seem weird when Forge was suddenly had like his shaman gear and was casting spells to try to bind this thing?
Yeah, that seems a little out of character or out of place.
Right, which he's a complex character, and that was actually part of his stuff in the comics. But boy, they did not set that up at all.
Yeah. Ninja says it's the first New Mutants run. It was also done by Claremont.
Right, I've read some of that, like Cypher dying and their crossover with Thor when the New Mutants got stranded in Asgard, but I haven't read a whole lot of it.
Okay.
I there's a decent amount of old comics that I got lucky that somebody had donated them to my local library when I was a small child.
Uh,
That's actually what introduced me to Deadpool.
oh. But
And
but
what
yeah,
a day
so
forever after.
yeah.
The other thing is that, and so in the first episode, we had some moments of anime logic with like Beast crawling inside of a Sentinel, pulling some wires around and riding it like a mecha,
Yeah.
and that seemed weird. I guess Storm's mutant powers, once they return, also include the ability to grow hair and generate a costume.
Yeah. Which Ninja pointed out too, yeah.
And it's like I get that it's symbolic of her kind of going back to like becoming herself again,
Yeah.
and that old black costume of hers was always a better suit for her than the Jim Lee white costume from the 90s. But that's one of those things where you wouldn't have necessarily had to rush it if you'd given her her own episode and a half or her own episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, the whole episode, well, that whole thing was the symbolism of her reclaiming her power.
Yes, exactly. But
Yeah.
eh, when it's a universe like okay, like I'm going to give an example here. It, let's hear if in I don't know Naruto or One Piece, a character hits self-realization and their clothing suddenly spontaneously changes to reflect that.
Yeah.
I, I'm not going to think too much of it because it's like, okay, well, this is a world where weird stuff happens on the regular, so I'll just accept it. But the X-Men world, like aside from the presence of mutants and aliens and stuff, is the world outside our window. So like a costume spontaneously generating kind of demands an explanation
Yeah.
if you're being critical of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Now, and also the adversary, unfortunately, because Storm's character growth is half baked, the adversary himself comes off, or herself, I guess, comes off as half baked.
Yeah.
Because there's not really like, because everything's on fast forward, there isn't even the opportunity to really show Storm being tempted by the idea of just being a normal human, because being a normal human has been so miserable for her.
Yeah.
So it's not
Mm.
like there was ever a moment where, like, and that would actually have been something you could have done if you'd like if you weren't gonna do this Forge storyline in one episode, it could have been like sprinkled in as 5-minute bits over the course of the season as a on recurring B plot in every episode. You
Yeah.
never had any time where Storm was shown the advantage of being human outside of her intellectually going, well, it's hard out there for mutants.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was watching that, it kind of reminded me of to go to the Bible when Jesus was in the desert and being tempted by the devil. And I thought maybe they would kind of go with something like that, where having having Storm, yeah, like you were saying, having Storm seeing visions of being a normal human, and oh, see how great it would be for you if you were a normal human, and
Right, you wouldn't have to worry about prejudice.
yeah, and yeah,
Which and oh, and you and Storm can, or you and Forge can go off and be happy together. And
right, yeah,
it's like, unfortunately, because it was fast forwarded, the temptation also felt fast forwarded and enforced. So
yeah,
it's just genuinely unsatisfying.
yeah. But then we got the A plot with the return of Charles Xavier.
Which, okay, I had wondered what the heck was going on because I thought that the show was just treating as non-canon the ending of the original series where Charles went into space to get fixed up.
Yeah, but nope, no, he's still there, and he's engaged to the Empress. Oh, I lost her name.
Elandra.
Alondra, yes, Alondra. And they first met, I think, what in like the second or third season.
It was around the time of the Phoenix storyline.
Okay, so that would have been like season two, I think,
Yeah.
if my memory is correct. Yeah,
Yeah, somewhere around there. But
yeah,
Lilandra was Charles's main love interest. He's had a couple of potential love interests in the comics, but the show treated Lilandra as the main thing.
yeah. And so she's decided that she wants to make him the her husband, and he's going to become a leader. But there are some people who in the Shi'ar who are not too happy about that.
Yeah, and I will say that I think that the episode building was a bit better here because I was noticing things like aliens of different species than the Shi'ar seemed to be doing a lot of the menial labor when we were looking around,
Yeah,
even before we kind of got into the storyline of it being about being anti-colonialist.
yeah, yeah. Which what was your how did you phrase that?
So at the end, Charles uses his brain powers to force everybody into a classroom, and he is about as subtle as a brick through a window.
Yeah,
And it's not so much that anything he said was incorrect; it's more that it wasn't as sophisticated as some of the other elements have been in the other episodes. And
Mhm.
it's like these Shi'ar had never heard anybody object to the idea of their empire before.
Yeah, which you would think that there would have been other alien species out there who would have objected to it at some point.
At the very least, we know that the Kree don't want to get on board with the program.
Yeah, although the Kree have their own issues.
True. And it occurs to me that the Kree didn't come out of nowhere because uh, Ms. Marvel, Carol Danvers, is canon to the X-Men 97 cartoon, which means
Yes,
that presumably the Kree superpowers that she had are also canon to it.
yes, and of course, Rogue has those powers.
Exactly. Uh, that wasn't so much coming out of nowhere as getting to finally see an element that was implicitly there the whole time.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, but I will say that the stuff with Charles and Lalandra was much more interesting than the stuff with Forge and Storm.
Yeah.
Especially at the moment where Charles gets a billion voices cried out at once, and then were immediately silenced
Yes. Yeah.
when the Sentinels attack.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's part of why the Storm storyline got rushed, is because they end her after she's gotten her powers back and she's stopped. Apparently, like, not only did Storm seal her powers shut, but she was also subconsciously wanting them shut. So that's why they weren't coming back when Forge was trying his best.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah. That part of it didn't really. I'm glad you explained that because that part didn't really make sense. Like, okay, well, where did her powers? How did they just came back? Like,
yeah, as far as I could tell, the what was going on there was that so her powers were actually suppressed by the whammy, and I
mhm.
got the impression that uh, either it had worn off, or Forge's efforts had actually borne some fruit and had helped her get her powers back, but she was just subconsciously not wanting them anymore.
Uh,
Either way, I took that moment of self-realization and actualization to fix things.
mm. Okay, so it's kind of like Spider-Man 2
Yeah,
when his powers stop working and he can't figure out why, and it's because he didn't subconsciously he didn't want to be Spider-Man anymore.
right. Which I don't know if that's 100% the show's interpretation, but that's kind of how I was taking it. Because otherwise, Storm getting her powers back at a dramatically convenient moment doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. But yeah, so the episode ends with like what DB was saying, Charles. Yeah, he sees the vision of everybody dead, including Gambit, which might be a reference to him how he'll come back, which is being Death, one of Apocalypse's four horsemen.
Which I never read that particular storyline. A lot of people have gotten to be Death. Archangel was Death.
Mm.
Wolverine was Death in that storyline where gave him his adamantium back.
Uh,
Um, let one of the X-Men who gets turned evil for a bit be Famine or something.
yeah.
But yeah, overall, this is the second worst episode of the series. And unlike episode 4, it wasn't painful to watch.
Yeah, yeah.
Just the Storm thing made me sad.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and I guess mid would be the right word for it,
As the Zoomers say, yes.
as Gen Z would say. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad the show is usually better than this. So hopefully, now that we've gotten all the elements on stage to get everybody to come back and reunite as the classic team, uh,
Mhm.
we can have an upswing again. Also, it makes sense why Charles is still in the opening.
Yes. Yeah. That part always got to me. I'm like, well, why do they keep showing him in the opening? It's like, yeah, because I thought he was dead, quote unquote, but
Right. No, now that I think about it, if that last episode from the old series was still canon, he wasn't even comic book dead. It's just that people were. It's weird because they kept talking about him like he was dead. Like, everybody there, in theory, just thought he was gone forever. Uh,
yeah,
Elsewhere, living with Lalandra, which you would still miss him. But it's like it's a different sentence to hear your grandfather is dead and your grandfather has been taken away by an alien, and you may never see him again.
Yeah. And Ninja says, I look forward to Charles returning, going, I left for 1 year and this happened. What the hell, Scott?
Look. Technically, this is what happens when you put Magneto in charge. Whenever X-Men is or Magneto's in charge of the X-Men in any capacity, things go to crap. See
Yeah.
Age of Apocalypse.
Yes.
Even if it isn't really his fault.
Yeah.